be starting. Hello YouTube, my name is David Self, and today I'm hosting a debate between two giants in epistemology, Timothy Williamson and Mike Huemer. Tim and Mike defend two radically different views, but both very influential, and both have acquired a large following, both in and outside academia. I could give an hour-long introduction to both Mike and Tim, but instead I'll be very brief. You can find more information about them in the description below. Tim is a professor at the University of Oxford and the author of, amongst others, Knowledge and Limits and Philosophy of Philosophy. Mike is a professor at the University of Colorado and, amongst others, the author of Skepticism and the Veil of Perception and Can We Know Anything? The debate format will be as follows. First, we'll start with opening statements in which both Mike and Tim explain their view in epistemology and give some brief motivation for their views. Then we'll move to opening criticisms, in which both Tim and Mike give an opening criticism of the opponent's view. In other words, why they think the other person is wrong. Then we'll have an open floor in which you can respond to the motivations and criticisms of your opponent. We'll end with closing statements, in which both Tim and Mike will give a summary of the arguments that were presented and their defense. Okay, that being said, let's move over to Mike. Mike, can you start?
Okay, great. Well, I made a brief slideshow, so I'm going to see if I can present it in a way that you'll see it. Let me see. Give me a second. Okay, what's happening? Do you know how to do this? Is there a thing to share your screen like there is on Zoom? All right, let me see.
I don't know how to do it.
Okay, let me see. Huh. I guess I should try this out before. I don't think this is going to work. I don't think. Okay, you're not seeing any of this, right?
No.
Let's see.
There's a just next to the leave button. There's a share button. Just right next to the leave button.
Okay, is that working? Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Anyway, so brief summary about my views about justification for beliefs. Okay, so my view is known as phenomenal conservatism. This is my basic view about when beliefs are justified. It's the principle that if it seems to you that P, then in the absence of defeaters, you thereby have at least some degree of justification for believing that P. So I have to say some stuff to explain what I mean by all this. So what is this stuff about if it seems to you that P? So I take it that when you say it seems to you that P, you're reporting a particular kind of mental state, which I refer to as an appearance or a seeming. This is a purely internal mental state. So it can seem to you that P, regardless of what's going on in the actual world, P doesn't have to actually be true. There doesn't have to be any connection to reality. It could just seem to you that way because of what's going on purely inside your mind. I take it that it's also a propositional attitude. So when you have an appearance or a seeming, there is something that seems to you to be the case. So a thing seems to be a certain way, something like that. Okay, these are not beliefs, but they're not completely unrelated beliefs. So it's possible that it seems to you that P, but you don't believe that P. And it might even be possible that you believe that P, even though it doesn't seem to you that P, although that would be quite rare. That might happen if, let's say, you're engaging in self-deception. So you sort of like talk yourself into believing P, even though it doesn't seem that way. Okay, they're also not dispositions to believe. I claim that appearances are maybe the categorical grounds for your disposition to believe. So when something seems to you to be the case, you will typically be disposed to believe it because of that. The disposition is grounded by the appearance. It's not identical to the appearance. There are different species of appearances. So there are sensory appearances, otherwise known as sensory experiences or perceptual experiences. So, when you look at the table in front of you, it's going to look to you like there's a table. The table will look to have certain characteristics, look to have a certain color and shape and so on. So those are appearances. There are also memory appearances, otherwise known as memory experiences. This is not exactly the same as the term memory, because when you say that you remember something, that is normally factive. So that implies that not only that you have a certain experience, but that the world was a certain way. So when you have a memory experience, that just means that you have an internal experience that's like remembering something, but it doesn't imply that the thing actually happened. Okay, or what some philosophers call a cue memory. Okay, a quasi memory, that's an example of an appearance. Okay, there are intuitive appearances. These are where you think about some proposition that just seems to you to be the case just from purely intellectual reflection. So if you think about the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line, that just seems right to you. Okay, so that's an intuition. That is an intellectual appearance that is not the result of reasoning. And then there are introspective appearances, although the introspective appearance might be the same state as the thing that it's an appearance of. So in other words, like the appearance of pain might be identical to the pain itself. But sometimes it seems to you that you're in pain, okay, and you are in pain. And then I claim there are even such things as inferential appearances. This is where, when you're engaging reasoning, there's some conclusion that just seems to follow. Okay, I also claim, although the above statement of phenomenal conservatism doesn't say this, but I also think that appearances are the only ultimate source of justification for belief. Okay, I want to say more. So the statement above mentions in the absence of defeaters. So defeaters are reasons for doubting an appearance. There are two kinds of defeaters: rebutting defeaters and undercutting defeaters. So a rebutting defeater would be evidence. So if you have the appearance that P, a rebutting defeater would be just evidence that not P, or reason for thinking not P. An undercutting defeater would be reasons for doubting the appearance other than evidence for not P. So generally, it's reasons for doubting that the appearance is reliable or that it's connected to the facts or something like that. Okay. And what is the stuff about justification? Just a couple of comments about justification. There are degrees of justification. So a proposition could be more justified than another. It could be more justified by a certain amount than another proposition. But then there's also a qualitative concept of a belief just being justified or not justified. Okay, and to have a justified belief requires passing some threshold level of justification. There's some degree of justification that you have to surpass in order for us to qualitatively call your belief justified. Right, now that threshold might be pragmatically influenced, so it might depend upon the consequences of being wrong, the cost of gathering more information, and things like that. It also might even be context sensitive, so it might depend upon the context that the speaker is in when they assess whether you're justified. However, the actual degree of justification that you have is not. So the degree of justification you have is not pragmatically influenced or context sensitive, but where the threshold is for you to count as being qualitatively justified might vary with pragmatic factors or context. Okay, and why should you believe phenomenal conservatism? One reason is that it gives you a simple, unified account of a lot of cases that you want to account for. A lot of beliefs that we want to explain why they're justified, that seem to us to be justified, and it's kind of hard for philosophers to explain all of these things. So why are perceptual beliefs justified? Like when you see a table, you're justified in believing there's a table there, or beliefs about the past, about things that you remember. Also beliefs about your own mental states, and also a priori beliefs, including like mathematical beliefs, moral beliefs, metaphysical beliefs. It's difficult to give a simple unified account of how all of these things are justified, and phenomenal conservatism does so. All of these things could be justified because of the appearances. I have another argument. I will call this the basing argument. So it's widely accepted that in order to have a justified belief, your belief has to be properly based upon something that confers justification for that proposition. So if you have a good reason for believing something, but that isn't the reason why you believe it for some other reason, then you're going to count as having an unjustified belief. Okay, this is widely accepted in epistemology. Now, I claim that our beliefs, or at least the beliefs that we have that are initially reasonable candidates for being justified beliefs, are only ever based upon seemings. That is, you believe something because it seems right to you or something like that. Or at least more broadly, they're based upon internal states. So if we're going to account for why our beliefs are justified, we have to allow the appearances, or more broadly, our internal states, to be the things that confer propositional justification for the cases of beliefs that we want to come out being justified. And I assume that we want to count most of our beliefs as justified. Note that it would be self-defeating if you wind up denying that your own epistemological beliefs are justified. Okay, and then there's another argument that I'm calling the internalist argument. So imagine a case in which you have there's a subject who has two different propositions that they would be maybe tempted to believe. And these two propositions seem relevantly alike to the person. They seem alike in all epistemically relevant respects to the subject. But they differ with respect to some external factor that some externalist epistemologist says is relevant to justification. So like it could be, for example, one of the propositions would be supported by their visual sense. Another proposition might be supported by their sense of hearing, and maybe their visual sense is reliable and their sense of hearing is not reliable, unbeknownst to the subject. So they appear to the subject exactly alike in all relevant respects, but unbeknownst to the subject, they're different in some external respect. Okay, so like the reliabilist might say, that makes the belief that is actually formed by the unreliable method unjustified. Okay, and now this is a premise that I think you'll find intuitive. It would be irrational for that subject to say, I believe P, but not Q, even though they seem to me exactly alike in all epistemically relevant respects. The person would have no way of accounting for why they were accepting one of them and not the other one. Okay, so that sounds irrational to me. And if so, then it can't be that P is justified, but Q isn't justified. Okay, so if that's the case, then it turns out that the external factor that the epistemologist said was relevant to justification is not relevant to justification. All right, and so that's why you should reject externalism about justification. Okay, and then let's see, is that all I have? Yeah, okay. That's all I have for now. I have more after Tim gives his speech. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to talk in a big picture way about the knowledge first approach to epistemology, which means an approach on which the central category for epistemology, which is often known as the theory of knowledge, is indeed the category of knowledge. And to see why that's the case, I think it's helpful to take a step back and consider that human beings are by no means the only creatures that have knowledge. I mean, many non-human animals have knowledge. So, for example, if you take predators and prey, for example, leopards and impalas or whatever, you can't make much sense of how they interact with each other if you don't realize that they sometimes know. The predator sometimes knows where the prey is. The prey sometimes knows where the predator is, and sometimes not. And so, just to make sense of a lot of animal behavior, the natural category is the category of knowledge that animals know quite a bit about their external environment, and notice that it wouldn't be particularly plausible to think about non-human animals in terms of what they can reflectively justify or anything like that. That's irrelevant. So that suggests that one might take a broadly evolutionary perspective to see what light it might cast on epistemology, and we could start with the question of what's the point of having a mind in the first place. because having a mind or a brain does consume enormous resources just maintaining the brain, and so it better be of some evolutionary value. And I think, there's a pretty obvious answer, which is that having a mind enables you to interact with a complex and fast-changing environment in flexible and appropriate ways that you couldn't do if you didn't have a mind, and that's because with a mind you're typically getting lots of knowledge about the environment on which you can act, which can, as it were, inform your decisions. And roughly speaking, the natural view of the function of a cognitive system is to provide knowledge for the creature to act on. And of course, sometimes things go wrong, and even non-human animals as well as human animals make mistakes. For example, birds flying into windows because they think that they've got a clear route ahead, but think wrongly. And there you have, they believe something, but what they believe is false, and therefore it's not knowledge. And so in those cases they're acting on their beliefs, but not acting on their knowledge. And those are cases where things are going wrong. But from a functional point of view, those are the bad cases. And in order to understand a cognitive system and what it's how it works, you have to understand how it, as it were, works when it is working properly, just as you do with any biological organ. And then the cases where it's something is going wrong, they can be understood, but understood as deviations from the good case. And the good case is where we're getting knowledge from the environment and acting on it, and that's the case for any kind of intelligent life. One particular example of this would be just seeing. So it's pretty clear that to understand vision properly, you have to understand it as something that provides information about the external environment to the creature when things are going well. Of course, sometimes things go badly and you can have visual hallucinations or illusions or whatever. But if you just take the internalist perspective on vision and just look at what's going on, as it were, from between the eye and the brain, and ignore the external environment, you won't be able to make sense of vision. There are certain things that you can study in that way, but you won't actually know what the point of having eyes is, and so that your understanding of vision would be extremely limited and in certain ways very superficial. And knowledge is really just a generalization of that example, so that you get knowledge by all the senses, vision, hearing, smell, touch, and taste, and so on. And what makes knowledge broader than just sense perception is that it can be retained in memory after you've stopped seeing or otherwise perceiving the relevant things or events, and it can also be transmitted by just telling others something that you know, and we can extend it by making deductions, by thinking as just as it were individually, and quite a lot of that is something that human beings have in common with non-human animals. I mean, we have sensory organs that are quite like the sensory organs of other animals, and we have some capacity for memory, which other animals have. What we have that they don't have are a really developed expressive language, which goes well beyond just a few sort of signals that we can get, and that's what we use for transmitting quite complex knowledge to each other. And it's also what we often use in as it were in our heads when we're doing reflective thinking. So it's not that we've got nothing more than the non-human animals, but what we do have is based on the same groundwork as they have. As I say, that's knowledge by perception, and then the retention of that knowledge in memory, and the category that seems appropriate for understanding what the point of this very elaborate cognitive apparatus that is involved in the lives of many species of animals is to enable us to act on the knowledge that we have about the environment. And as I say, the categories like appearance and justification and belief, they can the belief we can make some sense of for non-human animals because they can have false beliefs, but those are secondary. And if we don't start with the case of knowledge, which is where things are going as they should, then we're going to, as it were, in effect, miss the whole point of the enterprise.
Okay, great. Then we'll go over to the opening criticism for Mike. I cannot hear you, Mike.
Sorry, my microphone was off for a second there. Okay, anyway, so I have some slides that it might seem not completely connected to what Tim just said, because I was trying to guess what he was going to say, and I made these. I didn't guess completely correct, but I think I'm going to show these slides anyway. Wait, let me see. Wait. Hold on a second. Sorry for the delay here. I'm going to try to figure out how to do this.
We can see the.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good. I intended to be here. Not that one, right? Okay. All right. So, I think this is the basic difference between Tim and me with respect to explaining the justification of beliefs, which is that I rely on appearances, which are a purely internal mental state, and Williamson relies on factive mental states like seeing that P, remembering that P, knowing that P, and explaining why beliefs are justified. And those are, you might say, partly external. So if you see that P, P has to be the case in the external world. Okay, and so why rely on appearances? So first, why think that these purely internal mental states called appearances that I'm talking about exist? So imagine a person has a perfect hallucination, which is caused by direct brain stimulation to produce the same brain state as would occur in normal perception. So like when you see a squirrel, there's something happening in your brain, and imagine that somebody just artificially stimulates your brain to give you the squirrel experience. Okay, so that to you, it seems exactly like you were seeing a squirrel. Okay. Now, in the hallucination case, I think a purely internal mental state occurs. It's hard to say what. So you're going to have an experience that looks like it's a purely internal mental state because there's no squirrel. Okay, and that purely internal mental state is proximately caused by the brain state. Now, that brain state, by stipulation, also occurs in normal perception. Now, in general, just a general metaphysical principle, if you reproduce the last stage of a causal sequence, then you reproduce the effect, regardless of the earlier stages. So that means that reproducing this brain state causes a purely internal mental state in the case of hallucination. It should also cause a purely internal mental state in the case of normal perception. So in normal perception, you also have a purely internal mental state. Okay, and that's what I'm calling the appearance. Okay. Why should you think that justification is conferred by appearances rather than by these factive mental states? So again, consider a case where you have a perfect hallucination. It seems to me, and this is just like an whatever appeal to intuition. In the case of the hallucination, it seems to me like the subject is justified in believing P in the same way as when the subject perceives that P. So if I saw a squirrel in front of me, I'd be justified in believing there was a squirrel. If I had a perfect hallucination of a squirrel, I'd be justified in believing there was a squirrel in the same way, or so it seems to me. In the hallucination case, my justification doesn't consist in my having a factive mental state, e.g. perceiving a squirrel because I didn't perceive there was a squirrel because there wasn't one. So also in the perceptual case, the justification doesn't consist in having this factive mental state. Okay, and then I had some other slides, but they're not relevant because, they were anticipating Tim saying different things. Now I want to comment on the remarks about evolution. So I guess I'm going to quit this slideshow thing here. How do I get out of this? Oh, stop sharing. Okay, just stop sharing. Okay, sorry. Comments about evolution. So what would an internalist say about the evolutionary function of knowledge or justified belief? Well, I don't see why the internalist wouldn't say the same things about the evolutionary function of knowledge that an externalist would say. So, yeah, that's right. Yeah, knowledge function to help organisms navigate through the world. And well, you might think, well, is there any evolutionary function to internalist? Well, it's partly a tool to getting correct beliefs. And it doesn't always get you correct beliefs. So if you're brained in a vat, then it's going to get you incorrect beliefs. But luckily, in our evolutionary history, very few of us have been brained in vats. So when we form beliefs in the rational, justified way, we were normally correct. Basically, rationality gives you beliefs that are likely to be true across a wide range of circumstances, including, almost all the circumstances or most of the circumstances that our evolutionary ancestors were in. Now, evolution also has to do more than just make us care about rationality. It also has to give us the right appearances. Now, some other internalist views might have a hard time accounting for knowledge. Some other internalists have a hard time accounting for knowledge, like they're tempted by skepticism or might even become skeptics. But fortunately, I'm not tempted by skepticism because I have, so to speak, a low bar for justification. All right, I have a very liberal account of when beliefs are justified, which is you just have to have the appearance and not have reasons for doubting it. Okay, and so what evolution did was it just adjusted our appearances to make sure that we'd be justified in believing the things that are useful to believe, which are generally the things that are correct propositions about our external environment. Okay, let's see. Do I have more time, or did I use up my time mostly?
No, you can talk for a couple minutes. Right?
I'm saying, did I have more to say about this? I mean, I think that's pretty much what I had to say.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't really see what the problem is for the internalist in accounting for the function of either knowledge or justified belief.
Yeah. So now I'm replying not to what Mike has just said, but simply to his initial presentation of phenomenal conservatism. So I want to raise two issues about that. So one is a question about feasibility. So a very important fact about the phenomenal conservatism is that it's really based on something like the giving epistemological priority to the perspective of conscious reflection, and that came out in various things that Mike was saying. But so a difference between conscious and unconscious thinking and brain processes is that the unconscious processing is literally hundreds of thousands of times faster than conscious processing, which means that the pressure is to get as much of cognition done as you can unconsciously, because things will be way faster than that way, and so any kind of conscious process is going to slow things down drastically. Now, if we take the case of perception, where when our eyes are open in normal circumstances, we're getting enormous amounts of knowledge just because we're seeing what's going on around us. And I mean that knowledge, I take it, is also, I mean, meant to imply justified belief in the corresponding truths that we're learning through perception. But on the kind of view that Mike is defending, as I understand it, there's a conscious process which is needed in order to get from the sensory appearances, which is what he starts with, to the justified belief, or which is a corollary of the knowledge. And so in each case, one's, as it were, got to assent to the content of the appearance in order to form the belief, because the appearance itself is not even a belief or even a disposition to belief. And that process of assenting, because it's happening at the level of consciousness, will be incredibly slow by neural standards, and it will also be, I mean, and it will, because it will be so slow. If we did it for all the perceptual knowledge that we got, it would just create a hopeless bottleneck because of the slow speeds at which conscious processing works. And this would all be pretty pointless, because in the vast majority of cases with perception, we're not questioning it. We're just, as it were, taking things at face value. And so there would be a pretty much redundant slow process of having the appearance consciously and then consciously assenting to it, which I think would just be pretty much infeasible by simply for the reason of considerations about speed of processing. And I mean, any species which did things in that way would be wiped out by evolution within a couple of generations, and I'm inclined to say deservedly so. So that it's, I mean, of course, you could say, well, actually we get very, very little justified belief and very, very little knowledge from perception, but that also seems wrong, because perception is the way that we're learning about the world. So it seems to me that just on the basis of those kind of broad considerations of feasibility, it's just not feasible that justification would be operating in this world, because in this way, because it would prevent us from getting the amount of perceptual knowledge that we actually do get. So that's one concern. A second concern that I have about the kind of picture that Mike is presenting is that it's a broadly coherentist view of justification, in which what matters, I take it, is for justification is that your beliefs and the way things appear to you, that they should all be coherent with each other, and that produces some very worrying consequences, because suppose that we have a consistent Nazi who's managed, as it were, to bring all his horrible beliefs into consistency with each other, and he's also seeing the world in ways which are colored by them, so that his seemings will also cohere with this. Then, because on Mike's view, the justification is all ultimately based on appearances, and the appearances are all cohering together with the Nazis' beliefs. His beliefs will come out as fully justified, and then a further step, which it's not that easy to resist, is that if the Nazi is justified in his beliefs, then he'll also be justified in the actions that he takes on his beliefs. And so he'll be justified, for example, on this kind of internalist view, in believing that he ought to kill a whole lot of people, a whole lot of innocent people, and then if he goes ahead and kills them, it seems that his action will be justified, because it was based on justified beliefs, and so we end up justifying horrendous mass murder. I mean, of course, it will also end up justifying all sorts of things that non-Nazis do, because I'm not accusing Mike of being a Nazi. I'm just saying that the kind of coherentist appearance-based approach to justification that he's got is one which doesn't really have the resources to withhold justification from the consistent Nazi, and that seems to me a rather concerning consequence of his view.
Okay, then now it's open floor. For back and forth.
Well, I mean, I had a lot of things to say about that, but now I feel like then I'm going to wind up taking up too much time. But okay. So the point that unconscious processing is faster than conscious processing, and I mean, like I could say, or some internalists would say, yeah, well, maybe just like justified belief is really hard to get, and like maybe we're just going to wind up not having a lot of justified beliefs. Okay, but that isn't what I wanted to say. What I want to say is no, I have like a lower bar for justification than you think, right? Like you just have to have the appearance. It's got to cause the belief. You don't have to like consciously deliberate about whether to adopt the belief. It's just got to be the appearance caused you to believe. That could be automatic. It could happen immediately, and you didn't have reasons for doubting it. Okay, and you might think, well, what is the role for consciousness or the capacity for reflection? And basically, its role is, well, you have the ability to veto. So a normal person's default attitude is just trusting their senses. If you get into unusual circumstances, then you have reason for doubting your senses. Then you might sort of like veto the normal automatic process. But if you don't have anything special going on and you're just like a normal person being rational, then you're just going to automatically accept what the senses tell you. I had things to say about the consistent Nazi. So there are two ways of understanding this objection. I got a similar objection from Michael Tooley many years ago, but his example was like a terrorist who thinks that God wants him to kill a bunch of people. And so, one version of this is you might worry that some actual people, or like some realistically possible people, might actually be in this situation. Like I might have to say that some actual terrorists or some terrorists who are likely to appear in the future are going to be justified. I don't think that that's the case. So one thing I want to say is any non-psychopathic person is going to be able to see that, if you're planning on killing people, that is at least a morally momentous decision. And that fact raises the bar for justification. It doesn't change the degree of justification you have, it changes the threshold level of justification that you need to count as having a justified belief, if you're going to use that belief as a basis for some momentous action like killing other people. And so when the threshold for justification goes up, you become required to do things like extra checking. You become required to try really hard to test the belief just to make sure that you really are morally required to murder 100 people. And basically, I think no actual Nazi or terrorist does that. They do not try to check their beliefs to make sure. They do not listen to objections. Right? They don't read what the other side is saying. And if they do, their belief system falls apart. That's why they don't do it. Actual people with, heinous ideologies, I think, they're also full of false factual beliefs, full of incoherences, and full of self-deception. At least that's my claim anyway. Now you might think, oh, well, maybe, well, let's just take a hypothetical person. It doesn't have to be a realistic kind of person. And okay, so just stipulate there's a person who all of their appearances just kind of coherently point towards some heinous murder being justified. And now I think this would have to be in a very unusual, like a person like no actual person, and in very different circumstances. And then my claim is that we just shouldn't rely on intuitions about this case. And why not? So one thing is that I just don't think that our intuitions about blameworthiness of people who are totally different from us are going to be reliable. I think the subject might not even count as grasping our moral concepts. If you don't even see that killing other people is a momentous decision at all, like you don't see that, or like you're just like, or there's just like no basis in your belief system for objecting to that, then I think you're so different from us that maybe you don't even understand our moral concepts. But the more important thing I want to say is that I think that this type of example is sort of like sort of trading on our emotions. And so could you construct a parallel objection to an internalist view using non-emotionally charged examples? And if you can't do that, then I think that suggests either that moral propositions are importantly different from descriptive propositions, in which case we probably shouldn't use them to judge the general views about epistemology, or it's just because the example is trading on our emotions which are biasing us. Okay, that's my claim. And then if you consider non-emotionally charged examples, just like somebody has appearances that point to some very false, very far from reality descriptive propositions, but it's not anything that's upsetting, then I think people are just going to have plausible intuitions that the person is justified. So your brain in a vat, your beliefs about the external world are just totally radically false. But I think most people's intuitions are, oh, the brain has justified beliefs. Okay, sorry, I went on too long there, but
yeah. Okay. So I've got quite a number of things to say in response. So just taking the Nazi case first, I think there's a lot of evidence that millions of otherwise fairly normal people in Nazi Germany went along with the atrocities and were aware of them, and one way that they were able to do this is because the groups that were targeted by the Nazis, that they were thinking of those as not proper people, but sort of subhuman, and so they would have come to see killing the people from these groups as just like exterminating rats or something, and so it did not seem to them that what they were doing was morally very momentous. But that's not because these were people who by our standards are totally crazy. It's just that's what people can, the state that people can be reduced to by certain kinds of propaganda. And I mean, if you want a less morally charged case, you can just take conspiracy theories that strike us as ridiculous rather than frightening. I mean, there's a conspiracy theory about that many leading people in the world are actually lizards in human form. One version of this included that Queen Elizabeth the Second and Chris Christopherson, the singer, apparently were lizards in human form. So, but you can, I mean, you can in principle have someone who's got who is firmly convinced of a mad conspiracy theory like that without themselves being so crazy, but they just have these crankish views. I mean, you know, I know of cases of people who are otherwise completely normal, and you know, brought up in actually, as it happens in the US, who really believe that the Earth may be flat, and so it doesn't really take very much. We're not dealing with people who we'd never consider as it were, relevant in any way with these kinds of crazy views. So the second thing I would say, well, about the question of appearances and the question of whether there's actually time for the relevant processes. So you were saying that all you need is a causal connection between the conscious appearance and the conscious assent, but the trouble is that that those are still two distinct conscious states, and so the mere fact that you have these two distinct conscious states, even if one immediately follows the other, will still create the kind of bottleneck that I was talking about. I wasn't assuming that you had to go through a long process of reflection, because what we're talking about is speed in tiny fractions of a second. I mean, that's the respect in which consciousness is so slow by comparison with our unconscious processes. I mean, I think that what internalists tend to do is to generalize from a certain type of real case where we feel initial uncertainty, and as where things appear to us as a certain way, but we're hesitating to endorse the appearances, and those are genuine cases, but they're cases of a very special kind, where in effect, from a psychological point of view, I think what's going on is that we're getting what are called metacognitive signals from the, as it were, unconscious processing, that there is some reason for doubt, and that's what causes us to inhibit the acceptance, even though we're getting a strong pressure to accept. But that's not at all the normal case. That's not what is happening with regular perception, when there's no special reason to think that anything is going wrong. So I think the objection from speed of processing stands. And then the final point that I'd like to make has to do with the idea that appearances are purely internal states. So in other words, they're states that are constituted independently of what's going on in the external world. And so I think one of the examples that you were giving is, it's seeming to me that there's a squirrel there. But if you consider that the state of it seeming to me that there's a squirrel there, that's a state that is not constituted purely internally, because the content of it is that there is a squirrel there, and that's a content that one can only have through some kind of connection with the natural kind squirrels. I mean, there were people on a planet who have maybe animals that look a bit like squirrels, but actually their internal organs are all different. They don't belong to the species of any species of squirrel. They're not. It does not seem to them that there is a squirrel there. It may seem to them that there is, as it were, some other kind of animal that which in fact looks like and behaves like a squirrel. But so that even the description of the appearances is in fact surreptitiously dependent on the external constitution of content. Now, I know that some people have tried to produce theories of purely internal content, sometimes called narrow content, that is sort of independent of such matters. But I think the general view is that such theories have really got nowhere, and that this idea of purely internal content is just pie in the sky.
Okay, good. Let me see. So yeah, there was a lot of things to talk about. I don't know. So about the cognitive demands. So you were saying, oh, it's just a problem that we even have the second conscious mental state, even if it was caused automatically by the sensory appearance. What do you think of this? That well, most of the time, so you see a scene in front of you. Yet your visual experience contains a lot of information, and most of the time you just count as believing a bunch of stuff about the environment dispositionally. So you don't even have to have a current conscious mental state. So like if you saw me here, and if I didn't just say this, you could attribute to me the dispositional belief that there's a desk in front of me. And I probably wasn't, until I just said that, I wasn't entertaining the proposition, currently, that there was a desk in front of me. But I would count as dispositionally believing it just because I have this default attitude of trust in my senses, and that's what my visual experience is representing. So, right, so it doesn't look to me like there's a major cognitive demand on me there. You see what I mean?
Yeah. But so one kind of case to consider that is what's going on in the sense of, for example, let's take someone who's driving along a road, quite a busy road, but they're an experienced driver, and they're having a conversation at the same time. So certainly their main attention, maybe, I mean, in some sense, is focused on the conversation that they're having. But nevertheless, they're not crashing into people who are crossing the road or anything like that. And so that they are in fact being guided by their knowledge of what the layout around their car is, so that they're in effect acting on this knowledge and therefore belief. And so in these cases, it's not simply a matter of dispositional belief in the sense of things that they would assent to if they had time to think about it. It's that these are active beliefs which are informing the driver's actions as they drive skillfully along, and so in those cases you can't say it's just dispositional, because they're actually relying on these beliefs.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, so my thought is that, the dispositional belief isn't merely a disposition to believe something. There's got to be more going on to count as believing, even dispositional believing. Okay, so my suggestion is that you're having the dispositional belief is partly constituted by your having the visual experience, right? The perceptual experiences, and having an attitude of trust in your senses, and not having any particular suspicion in this case. Okay, so then you're being guided by your experiences, your perceptual experiences, and but partly because you have an attitude of trust in perception in general, and you don't have any suspicion about it, and so then that's good enough for you to continue driving, right? And then you might kind of wonder about this basing requirement, because it sounded like I thought, oh well, the belief has to be caused by the experience, and like, is there really a causal relation? Then I want to suggest, well, maybe I should make that broader. It just has to be like the experience is the ground for the disposition, right? It partly the ground for the dispositional belief. How about that?
So they're driving along and they're getting these appearances, and they also have an attitude of trust in these appearances, but that's got to be enough to get them to treat the appearances, to act on the content of the appearances, which is in effect to believe the appearances, and so there's an active belief there, as well as the attitude of trust and the appearance, because the attitude of trust and the appearance, I mean, they've still got to combine in order to produce something that will be an input to the decision making about whether to turn left or whatever it is, and so that's something that still involves a role for as it were taking in the appearances and then turning them into in effect into beliefs, and so because it's not that, as it were, just by, because as I understand, the point is that these appearances are not themselves dispositions to believe. So the disposition to, or the belief itself has to be formed in some way by the interaction of the attitude of trust and the appearance, and all of that seems to involve quite heavy duty processing of a time consuming kind.
My thought was that just the default attitude of just a general attitude of trust in your senses and lack of any special reason for doubt motivates the subject to allow their behavior to be guided by their sensory experiences.
But the trouble is that is in effect saying, if insofar as it works to eliminate, as it were, the sort of duplication that is so time consuming, it works by saying that the in the presence of this default attitude of trust in one's senses, the appearances in effect are beliefs or dispositions to belief, so that, as it were, there's no extra process of forming these dispositions, but then that goes back on the description of the appearances as not dispositions to believe, which you were insisting on.
I was thinking they were the ground of the disposition. So, but yeah. So what I'm saying now, it sounds like they partly constitute your dispositional belief. So that's right. Now, if you explicitly entertain one of the propositions about your immediate environment, then you're going to have an occurrent belief, which is going to be caused by the sensory experience. So the occurrent belief will not be partly constituted by, it'll just be caused by the sensory experience. Your dispositional belief will be partly constituted by the sensory experience. I think that's
but these are beliefs. I mean, I'm not sure that either dispositional or occurrent is a very helpful description of them, because these are beliefs which are, they're active in the sense that you are in fact acting on them as you drive along, but they, I guess on your view, they're not occurrent in the sense of there being a separate act of assenting to them, but they're also they're more than dispositional, because they're not just, as it were, a disposition to form, to assent to the proposition if the question arises, but you actually are, well, you're doing the thing that is even, as it were, more effective than assenting to the proposition. You're actually acting on it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So is it? Yeah, you might wonder if this is properly called a dispositional belief because there's an actual state. Well, it's only dispositionally a belief. So you're in a certain state where you trust your senses in general, plus you're having a sensory experience which represents certain information about the environment. And so like that together constitutes your believing the stuff about the environment, I guess, right? And so because part of that state is an actual occurrent state, which is a sensory experience, it's able to cause behavior. It's only able to cause behavior because you trust your senses in general, right?
Yeah. So, it's not. I would. These are not cases where it's only dispositionally a belief, unless you think that we can't have beliefs without being conscious of them. I mean, it's only dispositionally something that you would, as it were, consciously give your assent to in a kind of, as a quasi linguistic sort of way. But it's a belief that is, I mean, I take it that the nature of belief is that to be action guiding. And it's got that nature. It actually is action guiding. It's not just waiting to guide your actions. It's right there guiding them. And so it's not just that it has the potential to be a belief. It really is performing the belief role and is a belief.
Yeah. Maybe I mislabeled it. maybe we should need a new word for this way of believing. Assuming we accept this as a kind of belief, but nevertheless, like that solves the problem of the unreasonable cognitive demands, right?
Well, I mean, my guess is not, because I mean, so one issue is going to be that with something like driving, the driver has to react incredibly quickly to, for example, a child running across the road or whatever it is, and I suspect that some of these reactions have to be faster than even than the conscious appearance, so that, as it were, the action has to be initiated, but even before the conscious appearance, in order, I mean, of course, this is also happening so fast that we may not be clear about what the order of events is, but I mean, my guess is that you'd find that in certain cases we're initiating the action before the appearance, and so the belief on which we're acting, in, let's say, swerving to avoid the child, is one which was already a belief before there was any appearance. I mean, that's a further speculation, but I suspect that that's the case in quite a lot of these examples. I think that it's that if what one has is a setup. I mean, this is on the as well a more general point. If one has a setup where you're so disposed to trust your senses that as where you're not you're just not requiring anything extra to act on the appearances, that's just happening automatically, then it seems to me that what is going on there is that in effect the appearances have become beliefs in the presence of the this attitude that because they themselves involve this disposition to act, which is the characteristic of beliefs. I mean, maybe we've taken this particular issue as far as we can.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. A while ago. But I mean, that did make me, I guess, curious about your view about belief, right? Because it sounded like you thought the person could have the belief before they had the experience, and then when, like, I don't know, is there more to say about what the belief would consist of? Like,
well, it would consist of a disposition to act on the relevant proposition.
Yeah.
And and I think that that maybe that quite a lot of our beliefs are of that kind. That we, I mean, for example, we if one's talking about walking some route that you've walked many times before, you may have a disposition to. I mean, you may believe that something is around the corner, even before you have any conscious thought about it being round the corner. I mean, you may be, for example, you may be kind of angling in that direction, across the pavement or the sidewalk, and so that I don't think the question of what propositions we consciously entertain is crucial for belief, and the case of non-human animals is quite suggestive in that respect, because they certainly can't entertain. Certainly I take it that they can't entertain beliefs in anything like the sort of verbalized form that we entertain them, and so it's not as well, but nevertheless they have beliefs that they act on, and we can sometimes recognize that because of the in some cases it's because we can see that they've made mistakes, and and so they believe something that was false. In other cases it's because they're acting on knowledge, and presumably knowledge requires belief, and so they must have these beliefs, but they don't have them in the kind of form of anything like conscious assent. And my guess is that although humans have this extra layer of reflection and being able to put things in verbal form and so on, that quite a lot of our beliefs are of the same general kind as the beliefs of non-human animals.
Yeah, good. Okay, that was helpful. I guess we could talk about this, the stuff about content externalism.
Yeah.
So I'm not a philosopher of language, so I hesitate to argue about this. But anyway, I was always sympathetic to Searle's line. I was taught by John Searle when I was an undergraduate, and the line was basically like, well, you ascribe to the subject a content that's self-referential, and it's going to refer to something about the like the causes of the subject's own past experiences. And then so that, like, the person on the other planet who they don't have real squirrels, they have like something else that looks like squirrels, they're also going to have a sort of like parallelly self-referential content that's going to refer to the thing that caused their experiences, and then it's going to connect up to the other species that's on that planet, right? You see what I mean? Like, so what's wrong with that?
Well, I think it's greatly over intellectualizing what we're doing. I think also that if one, I mean, it's in effect one form of a descriptive account of natural kind terms, and which have notoriously run into all sorts of problems. In this particular case, I think one thing would be very hard to specify what experiences we were talking about the cause of, without already using the term squirrel. I mean, I say you could. I mean, of course, you could say that it's somehow the cause of other people's use of the word squirrel. That seems, as it were, completely implausible as an account of, for example, what small children are talking about when they say that they've seen a squirrel and so on. That they're doing this very elaborate thing. There's no real evidence that this is what's going on, and it also seems that the kind of, if you take a visual experience that where it seems to you that there's a squirrel there, again, probably that's an appearance that for example, a fox can have, because it's not only, I mean, we're not the only creatures who to some extent recognize natural kinds, and it seems plausible that, for example, foxes are able to think about squirrels and have various beliefs about how squirrels behave, which may enable them sometimes to catch squirrels, and the fox certainly isn't thinking anything about
Yes.
like the cause of tokenings of of my internal word squirrel or anything like that.
Right. It might not even be self-aware, so it might not have the awareness of its own mental states in order to have that. Right. Yeah. Well, I was thinking that what makes it the case that your experience has this self-referential content, or I guess like whatever your belief that there's a squirrel has this self-referential content? I was saying that, well, it didn't have to be that you actually thought to yourself, there's this type of species that has been causing my experiences. It might just be that counts as the content because of a set of dispositions that you have. So like if you were to find out, like you were to see another thing that looks like a squirrel, and you were to find out that it has different evolutionary history from all of the other squirrel-looking things that you've seen, then you would say that it wasn't a real squirrel. Just the fact that you have that disposition makes it the case that the content of your squirrel thoughts is this self-referential thing about the same species as has been causing my past experiences. Yeah. And so then that's supposed to greatly lower the cognitive demands of having this kind of content.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly no. I mean, such views of the semantics of natural kind terms are not. I mean, virtually nobody accepts them these days. I mean, in part the attempt to give a series of meaning in descriptive terms the descriptions generally just don't work out. I mean, when if you for example, if you if you look carefully at what kind of causal connections you were postulating, they might not they actually obtain, in various cases where people are using the word. I mean, people. I mean, generally speaking, descriptive theories of meaning tend to have great difficulty with making sense of the idea that different people have mean the same thing by the word squirrel, and the and great difficulty in explaining why one description would somehow trump all the other descriptions that people associate with the word, like squirrel, that why one of these should be the one to be picked out. I mean, you can try talking about what would happen if you were to question people, but those kind of forms of as it were, how behavior under interrogation don't necessarily tell you very much about the meaning of a word, as opposed to how what people sort of confabulate about how they would behave in certain circumstances. And I think more generally, it's just that such views don't really fit in with contemporary theories of content. I mean, they which are much more minimal in the kinds of content that are expressed by sentences like "there's a squirrel," and of course there's a further issue about what the content of the word "cause" itself would be, and etc. etc.
Yeah. So that like I say, I don't know this area. So I haven't worked in philosophy of language, but I was thinking. So suppose that you found a person who, so they're using the word squirrel, and it appears to be the same way as us. But for this particular person, if they found out that you tell them, hey, here's a thing that looks like a squirrel, but actually it's from another planet. It's just coincidental that it looks like the animals that you call squirrels here. Totally different history, blah, blah, blah. All the, different genetic code, blah, blah. You tell them all that, and they're like, so what's your problem? It's still obviously a squirrel. Okay, so this person has totally different intuitive reactions or dispositions to have intuitive reactions, to these different cases from us. And then my intuitive reaction is, oh, so that person doesn't mean the same thing that we mean. And they actually just mean, this collection of observable properties, right? Okay. And then
my reaction is that person means the same as us, but is a bad philosopher. I mean that, and maybe not even that bad a philosopher, but I mean, what we're talking about is what a person happens to believe about how squirrels are individuated, but what they believe about how squirrels are individuated doesn't affect particularly the meaning of the word squirrel, and it doesn't really affect the fact that they're just using the word squirrel as other people do, but with some kind of non-standard views about how kinds are individuated, which is anyway quite a controversial issue. I mean, there's quite a lot of you get controversies, for example, about whether people in the past who said that whales are fish, about whether they were right or wrong, and that sort of issue is one on which individuals within the same speech community diverge simply because they have different theories about how kinds are individuated, but the difference in theory doesn't.
So suppose you tell this person, look, like all the biologists say that this isn't a squirrel, and the person goes, yeah, so what? I don't care. Okay, and then you tell them, but look, this is not actually the same natural kind. Like there's a natural kind, and then this particular thing that looks the same as the other one isn't part of that kind. The person goes, yes, so what? It's still a squirrel, right? And then
maybe this person is a science denier and thinks that all the biologists are in some kind of conspiracy to rip off the taxpayer and so on. But the fact that they think all of that doesn't mean that they don't mean what the rest of us mean by the word squirrel.
Oh no! Well, I was thinking that the person does not have any false non-semantic beliefs. So like they believe the scientists that there is a natural kind, and they just don't care about that, and that doesn't have any effect on their disposition to apply the word. And then they might go, oh wow, I guess I just found out that everybody meant something different by squirrel. But anyway, this still looks to me like a squirrel. Right? And I sense that like they weren't attempting to match the usage of the experts, and they weren't attempting to refer to a natural kind. Like they explicitly, right? And then my thought is because they had different intentions or different whatever dispositions have and intuitions, then they didn't have the same meaning.
Yeah, but I mean, whether somebody is, as an individual, is attempting to refer to a natural kind, it's again a matter of, to some extent, of their theoretical views. I think if you asked a lot of people who when they said there's a squirrel, and you asked them, oh, were you attempting to refer to a natural kind? That they would probably say, what the hell are you talking about? I was just talking about squirrels, and I don't want to, I don't know anything about natural kinds. I just think that that's a squirrel, and and if people I think going back to something you said just before, I think it's actually relatively rare that people are, as it were, are mistaken metalinguistic, about the meanings of words without also, if they're meanings of words that they themselves use, without also being mistaken just at the level of non-metalinguistic claims.
This would not happen in a normal person. But my thought was just that this is supposed to illustrate that, like, there's something internal to the person that's relevant to, sort of determines why they mean the thing that we're saying they mean. Like, it has to do with the person's own dispositions and their own intentions or something like that. Like, that's part of why their word latches onto the natural kind. If a person had no interest in referring to natural kinds, and they could recognize that there are natural kinds, but that's just not what they're trying to refer to, then they wouldn't be referring to it. And so then that's supposed to give you support for a more internalist view about content.
Yeah, I don't think that those kind of individual intentions are really required for using words with their normal meanings, because they all have to do with a level of reflection on one's own linguistic practice that just isn't required for a normal speaker of the language.
Right. Yeah. Well. Okay. Yeah. So you don't have to have any explicit attitude, but maybe you have to have appropriate dispositions.
I think you might, if you go out and test people, you might find that many of them do not have what we would regard as the appropriate dispositions. I mean, when one reads something like Kripke's Naming and Necessity, or Burgess' work, or Putnam's, one is to some extent learning what the right answers to questions like that are, and I think more philosophical sophistication is involved in, as it were, answering those questions well than one might expect.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we just have different intuitive reactions. Like if there's a person who doesn't have the appropriate dispositions, then I would probably just say that they don't have the same meaning. So, somebody reads, they read about Kripke and they're like, or no, they read about twin Earth and they're like, no, twin water is water. What are you talking about? Then I would probably just say, well, then they just had a different meaning of water from most of us.
Yeah, but I mean, Burge's case of the guy who claims that he's got arthritis in his thigh, it does speak to these examples, because he's and maybe even if he insists, when the doctor tells him, no, look, you can't have arthritis in your thigh because it's a condition of the joints, and who just insists, well, that may be what the doctors say, but I know that I've got arthritis in my thigh. I mean, I think the usual reaction to such cases is that if he goes on insisting that he's got arthritis in his thigh, then he's being dumb. But being dumb is not enough to make you not a normal speaker of the language.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Yeah, like I'd be tempted to say that he's just using arthritis in a non-standard sense. But you really got to make sure that he knows all of the facts. Like he knows that nobody else in the world is using the word this way, but he still wants to use it that way. All right. I don't know. Maybe we spend enough time on that. Okay. Well, the last thing was talking about the people with, let's say, crazy beliefs and crazy appearances, like the people who think that maybe they're lizard people who are in top positions around the world or something like that. I don't know what's going on with those people. So, but I mean, my initial reaction is, well, they've got to have lots of defeaters. I mean, like if the rest of their behavior is somewhat normal, there's got to be lots of sort of basis for giving them arguments against that possibility, right?
But I mean, that doesn't. I mean, they don't have to be internally consistent. I mean, it's. It's not as though they've seen Chris Christopherson dissected and seen all the scales that he had under his human skin, human looking skin, or anything like that. And I mean, it's quite a common experience talking to people who are in the thrall of a conspiracy theory, that you can force their views. I mean, you can force them to, as it were, endorse more and more crazy consequences of their view. But I think it's very rare that they actually contradict themselves. And and so if they just if they meet this very minimal standard of consistency, and and I doubt that you can even force them into cases where they're saying things which are just, from a purely formal point of view, are kind of bound to be implausible. It's really just that they seem completely out of touch with the real world, and one can.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking that they're.
Yeah, I'm just going to say. I mean, one example of this. There are some people who. I mean, in the 19th century, when when the creationism was, on the defensive. I mean, some people reconciled, the idea, the creationist story with all the biological. With all the evidence, of dinosaur fossils and so on, by claiming that that God had created the Earth in about 4000 BC with all these delusive traces, as a test of our faith and so on. And I would regard that as a pretty crazy view, but I don't think that it involves any logical inconsistency.
No, it's not. It's not inconsistent. No, it's just highly improbable. Well, I'm thinking that the conspiracy theorists or like the religious person are they've got non-epistemic motives. They've got something else that's messing with their belief formation. Like they have a strong desire to believe this, and this is particularly plausible for the religious person. They just really want to believe in God, and actually they believe that they're morally required to believe in it or something. It would be morally wrong for them to have doubts or something like that, and that's motivating their belief. And so that could be what's making it unjustified.
Well, they think that God would be angry if they didn't believe in his existence.
Yeah, and you might go to hell if you change your belief, so you can't. And this is like a non-epistemic motive. And so your belief is not going to be completely based on the appearances.
Yeah. Well, I think it will be. If people, for example, are brought up in a community where that's a standard view, the way they believe these things will not, doesn't have to be wishful thinking. It could just be, as it were, a very normal kind of social conformity,
That's right, but that still counts as a non-epistemic motive. So so there's a motivation to conform to the rest of your society, and so that's not just conforming to the appearances.
Well, of course it appears to them that their parents and other authority figures are truth speakers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Would there be no basis for defeaters? You could tell them, well, look, here's some other societies where they have different religions. This is actually a common argument that you give to religious people. Other societies who have different religions. Look at the people who grew up in that society, and they look like you. They have attitudes like you, except towards a different religion. Don't you think that you would probably have those attitudes if you'd been born there? And
they may think, thank God I wasn't.
Yeah. Would they not see the point of the argument? So, my thought is, oh well, they've got defeaters, so, and they're motivated. They have a non-epistemic motivation for trying to disregard the defeaters, right? It's painful to question these because these beliefs are really important to them, right? And they've had for a long time, and they also currently believe that something terrible will happen to them if they question their beliefs, right? So they have non-epistemic motives, and so that's part of the basis for their belief, and so that infects it and stops it from being justified.
I suspect that you're requiring a kind of purity of motive that means that virtually nobody has justified beliefs, but.
Right. Well, yeah. So it's not that you're unjustified if there's any influence at all from non-epistemic motives, but if it's big enough, it would make a difference, right? Because plausibly that's the case. The religious people, it is making a difference. If they didn't have these non-epistemic motives, then they'd be more open to hearing objections. Yeah, plausibly. I don't know what's going on with the lizard people conspiracy theorists. Actually, I'm not sure how serious that is. Because I think it might just be that people are messing with the survey, a survey conductor.
You should go to David Icke's website if you want to see the where this theory comes from. He's not messing with the survey. I think this is very important to him, and it has all kinds of
You're sure that he's not just trolling
political
us?
ramifications of unpleasant kinds. But I wasn't wanting to appeal to the those aspects of it. I was just taking it as an example of a pretty ridiculous view, but it's one which has had quite a bit of uptake.
Yeah, I mean, so I can imagine scenarios in which somebody would be justified in believing something that is ridiculous, ridiculous to us. I'm not sure that is the case for any of these actual conspiracy theorists. But like I wonder this about schizophrenics, who like they have hallucinations and then they think things that we regard as crazy, literally crazy. But I think they might be justified because like they're having hallucinations that are supporting these things, and they're not able to reason, like normally. So they're just not able to understand the defeaters for them or something like that. So they might actually be justified in their crazy beliefs. Right, and then then you might wonder, well, how important is justification then? Like, should we care about that? Yeah, I mean, like it's not doing them much good, right? There's what's wrong with them isn't that they're being unjustified, but that they're crazy or something like that. Like all of the defects don't have to be unjustification. All right. Yeah, I don't know. Anything else? Like we've been going for like an hour and a half or so. Should we wrap up?
Yeah, I think we've probably gone over the ground.
Yeah.
Well,
David, you'd said that we were going to give closing statements. I don't exactly have a closing statement.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Yeah, no, okay. Then
I don't have one either. I mean, I don't just want to repeat what I said at the beginning.
Yeah, no, makes total sense.
People can go back to the beginning of the video if they want to hear it again.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Maybe I wanted to ask one more question that Huemer brought up. Huemer brought up the new evil demon, intuition. The person who's a brain in fat is still justified, but he doesn't know. So he is not justified on Tim's view because he's not in effective mental state. Tim, what was your response to Huemer's argument?
So I think what it's playing on is the fact that in normal versions of the evil demon scenario, one's talking about a cognitively virtuous person who's through no fault of their own had their brain extracted and put in a vat or whatever it is, and the picture is that they still retain the same basic cognitive dispositions, and so they're the beliefs that they're forming are the ones that that a reasonable person would form in those circumstances, and so in that sense, because they're doing what a reasonable person would do in these very bad epistemic circumstances, that their beliefs are justified, and I think what's going on there is just a conflation of that notion with a more basic notion of justification, which roughly speaking has to do with how well or badly the belief is supported by one's evidence, and so it's on the kind of externalist view that I suppose that these people have much less evidence than they think they have, and their belief is actually not well supported by their evidence, because I mean, for example, if it's the belief that they have hands, that normally people think, well, I know that I have hands because I can see them in front of me, and so on, and they don't in fact have that kind of evidence for their false belief that they have hands, false because they're a brain in a vat, and so there's, as it were, a more basic standard of justification that they fail, even though if you want to, you can use the word justification for doing what a reasonable person believing what a reasonable person would believe in those circumstances, but really that's the more basic thing that's appealing to is that reasonable people who are people who believe on the whole things that are supported by their evidence, and which is a different standard from the one that's actually being applied in these cases. But I mean, I should say that I don't find the category of justification particularly helpful in epistemology. I mean, it's one thing is it's as it were, it's a kind of it's a theoretical artifact, because it's not just using the word justification in the ordinary way, but with some extra theoreticians' stipulations about how we're only talking about epistemic justification. We're not talking about the kind of pragmatic justification that you might have, where you believe something because it will enable you to, the belief will enable you to survive in your circumstances, whether or not it's true. And so it's a, in effect, justification is being used as a technical term, so that it's not really something that that, as it were, our common sense has much authority about, because, if you like, it's not something that common sense itself has particularly thought about. And I think also there's always, with the justification, there's always a little bit of a trace of the way that we use the word, justifying a belief or justifying an action, which is some kind of, that's something that we do when we're challenged, and so it relates to how we're able to manage or not manage in a kind of dialectical situation where we're arguing with somebody who's initially skeptical. And one reason I don't regard that as a very fundamental standard in epistemology, because it's a standard that is really only relevant to language users. It's completely irrelevant to non-human animals. You can't call on a cat to justify its beliefs, and that suggests that what we're dealing with justification, it's not something at the most fundamental epistemological level. It's, as it were, something that just has to do with the, as it were, a kind of sophisticated overlay of verbal beliefs, verbally expressed beliefs, over as were the more primitive and basic levels of cognition.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe I can ask one question also for Huemer, that I was just wondering that like many people have this. You say, well, it's okay to trust your appearances if you don't have the feelers. But one might wonder, okay, but why trust my appearances? Maybe what I'm interested in is I think an attraction of Williamson's view that, yeah, what's doing the work for him is factive mental states. And what I want is I want to have true beliefs. I want to have or knowledge.
Yeah.
But how can I get, like, why should I trust my seemings? That's kind of my question. Like, why should I think they're reliable? Why?
Well, yeah, good. So Yeah, so your thought might be, well, your goal is something external, which is like truth. Truth is not internal. But then I'm saying that the way that you should guide your beliefs is by this internal thing, which is consistency with the appearances or something like that, and lack of defeaters, but defeaters are also internal. So there's some kind of disconnect between your goal and your means. But I want to say, yeah, but that nevertheless is the means to pursuing that goal. It's that believing what seems true to you, provided you have no reasons for thinking otherwise, is just what constitutes rationally pursuing the truth. Right. So like if you're playing basketball, you're trying to get the ball through the hoop. What you have to do is you have to try to throw it through the hoop, and that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get it through the hoop. And also there could be scenarios in which when you try to do that, it makes you less likely. Lowers the physical probability of getting through the hoop. But nevertheless, if you want to go through the hoop, you still have to do this thing of aiming and throwing it. And so there's no way of guaranteeing it will work. But that's how it is with belief. That's what we have to do. We have to try to get true beliefs, and trying to get true beliefs just is believing the things that appear to you to be true. Right? Roughly speaking, in the absence of grounds for doubt.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. I think that's very good. Unless one of you wants to say something else.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to thank both of you. I want to thank David for organizing this. I want to thank Timothy for coming and talking with me. It's great because you're a great epistemologist and great philosopher, and I very much appreciate your work. So I'm glad that you came to talk.
Thanks again to David and to Mike for a very enjoyable, far-reaching conversation.
Okay. Then I'm going to end it here. You can find in the description below links to the books that I mentioned in the introduction, where you can read more about Williamson's and Tim's and Mike's views. There's much more to say about both of them. Thanks for checking out this video. Okay, see ya.
Great, see you. Nice to meet.
All right, nice. So just okay, I guess I can go here.